Some roads don't appear on any map because they're meant to find you when you need them most. And that night the storm carved one straight through Ethan Cole's path as freezing rain hammered against his windshield in sheets so thick it blurred the world into shadows and motion. The wipers barely keeping up as the tires slipped over slick asphalt miles from the nearest town, the kind of empty stretch where even the wind felt like it was watching. And beside him Rex sat upright in the passenger seat, ears high, body tense, not restless, but focused in a way Ethan had learned never to ignore, because Rex didn't react without reason, not after everything they had been through together. And then it came, not a sound but a shift, the dog's low growl rolling through the cab just seconds before Ethan saw it. A shape in the road where no one should have been. A lone figure standing still in the middle of the storm as if the cold and the rain didn't touch him. An instinct said, keep driving. Don't stop. Not out here. Not like this. But something deeper, quieter, the same instinct that had once kept him alive in places far worse than this, told him to slow down, to look closer, to listen. And when the headlights fully caught the man's face, pale but calm, eyes steady instead of desperate, Ethan felt something he couldn't explain, not fear, not exactly, but recognition, like a memory he couldn't quite reach. And Rex's growl softened into a low, uncertain rumble, as if even he couldn't decide whether this was danger or something else entirely. Something older, something waiting, and the truck rolled to a stop as the storm pressed in around them, wind shaking the frame, rain drumming like distant footsteps. And for a moment neither man moved, the stranger simply watching, not asking, not waving, just standing there as if he had known this exact moment would come, as if out of every mile of empty road, every passing hour, it would be this truck, this night, this man who would stop. And Ethan's hand rested on the steering wheel, steady but heavy, the engine idling beneath him, the world outside blurred and restless, and somewhere beneath the sound of the storm, beneath the hum of the truck, there was a quiet feeling settling in his chest, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't warn, but lingers just long enough to be noticed, whispering that this wasn't chance, that some roads don't just lead you forward, they lead you exactly where you're meant to be, even if you don't yet understand why. The man did not rush when Ethan opened the door. He simply stepped forward with a slow, measured movement, as if the storm had no claim over him. And when he climbed into the passenger seat, Rex shifted slightly, but did not bark, only watching with those sharp amber eyes that missed nothing, the kind of look that said he was still deciding, still listening to something deeper than sound. And the cold followed the stranger inside, not biting, not harsh, but heavy, like the air itself had weight. And Ethan pulled back onto the road without a word at first, tires gripping and slipping against the wet pavement as the headlights cut a narrow path through the darkness. The man's clothes were soaked through, yet he did not shiver, his hands resting calmly in his lap, fingers still, almost too still, and after a long moment he spoke, his voice low and steady, carrying no strain, no urgency, just a quiet certainty that settled into the truck like a second presence. He said, you chose to stop. And Ethan glanced at him briefly, unsure how to answer because it had not felt like a choice at all, more like something had slowed his foot before his mind caught up. And Rex gave a soft huff, turning his head toward the man as if recognizing the tone more than the words. And the road curved deeper into the forest where the trees leaned close, their branches bending under the weight of rain, forming a tunnel of shadow that seemed to swallow the world behind them. And then the man spoke again, directing him without hesitation, turn left ahead. There is a road you cannot see until you are on it. And Ethan almost questioned it, because there had been no sign, no marker, nothing but darkness and trees. But somehow his hands moved before doubt could take hold. And sure enough, a narrow gravel path revealed itself at the last second, hidden between two thick trunks, the kind of road no one would notice unless they were looking for it, or being led to it. And the truck eased onto it with a crunch of wet stones, the storm fading slightly as the forest closed in, muting the wind, softening the rain into a steady whisper against the roof. And Rex's posture shifted again, not tense now, but alert in a different way, his nose lifting as if catching a scent carried not through the air, but through memory itself. And the path wound for what felt like miles, though the odometer barely moved, time stretching in that quiet, until at last a shape emerged ahead, a cabin, small and weathered, its outline barely visible in the dim glow of a single lantern hanging by the door, and Ethan slowed to a stop, the engine humming softly as the world outside settled into an unnatural stillness, the kind that feels less like peace and more like waiting, and the man reached for the handle, pausing just long enough to look at Ethan with a gaze that held something unreadable, something that lingered longer than it should. And he said, "You were meant to find this place. Not tonight, perhaps, but eventually." And then he stepped out into the rain, walking toward the cabin without looking back, while Rex let out a low, quiet sound. Not fear, not warning, but something closer to recognition, as if the truth had already begun to surface, even if Ethan had not yet seen it. The door of the cabin creaked open before Ethan could knock, as if the house itself had been listening for their arrival, and warm light spilled out into the rain, soft and golden against the dark woods, carrying the faint scent of cedar and something older, something that felt untouched by time. And when Ethan stepped inside with Rex close at his side, the storm seemed to fall away completely, not just quieter but distant, like it belonged to another place entirely, and the man moved ahead. Without a word, setting a lantern on a wooden table worn smooth by years that could not be counted, the walls lined with simple objects, a coat hung neatly by the door, boots placed side by side, and photographs, dozens of them, each framed in aged wood, their surfaces catching the light in a way that made them feel alive rather than forgotten. And Rex slowed, his paws clicking softly against the floor as his head turned from one corner to another, not exploring but studying, his ears shifting at sounds Ethan could not hear, his nose lifting as if tracing something woven into the air itself. And Ethan felt it too now, a subtle weight beneath the quiet, not threatening but present, like the cabin held more than what could be seen. And the man finally spoke again, his voice carrying through the stillness with a calm that did not need to be raised. He said, "This place remembers," and Ethan glanced at him, unsure whether he meant the house or something else entirely. And before he could ask, Rex stopped abruptly near the far wall, his body going still, his gaze fixed on a narrow door barely visible between two shelves, and a low sound formed in his throat, not a warning but a refusal, the kind he had only ever made a few times. And Ethan knew that sound meant something mattered, something unseen but real. And he stepped closer, feeling the air shift as he approached, cooler there, quieter in a way that pressed against his ears. And the man did not stop him, did not speak, only watched with that same steady expression as if this moment had already been decided long before they arrived. And Ethan reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the door, rough and cold beneath his touch. And for a brief second, he felt something like a pulse, faint but unmistakable, a rhythm too, steady to be imagined. And he pulled his hand back slightly, the memory of it lingering in his palm, and Rex let out a soft whine, stepping back just enough to keep distance but not enough to leave, as if he would not cross that threshold but would not abandon Ethan either. And behind him the lantern flickered once, casting shadows that stretched along the walls like quiet echoes, and the man spoke again, softer this time, almost like a thought spoken aloud. "Some doors are not locked to keep people out, but to wait for the right one to open them." And Ethan stood there in the stillness, the storm gone, the world narrowed to this single moment, feeling that same quiet certainty settle deeper inside him. The sense that whatever lay beyond that door was not chance, not coincidence, but something that had been waiting patiently for him to arrive. For a long moment Ethan did not move, his hand hovering just inches from the door, as if crossing that final space required more than simple motion. And the cabin seemed to hold its breath with him, the lantern flame steady but watchful, the silence deepening until even the faint sounds of the storm outside felt like distant memories rather than something real. And behind him Rex shifted his weight, nails brushing lightly against the wood as he stepped back another inch, not out of fear but respect, the kind of instinct that said this moment belonged to something greater than either of them. And Ethan finally closed his eyes for a second, steadying himself the way he had learned long ago, when stepping into the unknown was the only option left. And when he opened them again, his hand pressed fully against the door and pushed, slowly, carefully, as the hinges gave a low, almost reluctant creak, revealing not darkness but a narrow staircase descending into a soft, muted glow. The light below pale and steady like it had been burning for years without interruption, and a cool breath of air rose from beneath, carrying with it the scent of earth and something faintly metallic, not unpleasant but ancient, like a place sealed away from time itself. And Ethan stepped forward, one foot finding the first step, then the next, each movement deliberate as the wooden stairs held firm beneath his weight, and Rex remained at the top, watching, ears high, body still, his gaze never leaving Ethan, as if anchoring him from above. And with each step downward the air grew quieter, thicker, until the world above seemed to fade entirely, replaced by a stillness so complete it almost felt alive. And when Ethan reached the bottom, the space opened into a small chamber carved into the earth, its walls lined with smooth stone, the surface worn not by decay but by careful hands. And at the center stood a single wooden table, simple yet precise, its edges clean, its surface untouched by dust, and on it rested a small metal box, dark with age yet polished in places where it had been handled, as if someone had returned to it again and again over the years. And Ethan approached slowly, his breath steady but measured, a quiet awareness settling over him that this moment had been waiting far longer than he had been searching. And behind him, from somewhere above, Rex let out a single low sound, not a warning but a signal, the kind that said this was the point where everything would change. And Ethan reached out, his fingers brushing the lid of the box, feeling the faintest vibration beneath his touch, the same steady rhythm he had felt in the door, as if whatever rested inside was not just an object, but something carrying a presence of its own. And for a brief second he hesitated, not out of fear, but out of understanding, because deep down he already knew that once opened, nothing about this night would remain the same. And in the quiet of that hidden room, with the storm gone and the world above held at a distance, Ethan lifted the lid. The lid opened without resistance, as if it had been waiting for that exact touch. And inside there was no gold, no documents stacked in neat rows, nothing that matched the expectation of something hidden for years, only a single envelope resting at the center, its edges worn but carefully preserved. And for a moment Ethan simply stared at it, the quiet in the room pressing closer, as if urging him forward. And when he finally reached down and lifted it, the paper felt heavier than it should have, not in weight but in meaning, like it carried something more than words. And his name was written across the front in steady, deliberate handwriting. Ethan Cole. The letters slightly faded but unmistakable, and his breath slowed as his thumb traced over the ink, a strange mix of disbelief and recognition settling into his chest, because there was no reason for his name to be here, not in a place like this, not in a cabin hidden miles from any road he had ever known. And above him Rex shifted again, a soft whine echoing down the stairs, not urgent but aware, as if he understood the importance of what was happening even without seeing it. And Ethan opened the envelope carefully, unfolding the letter inside with hands that had faced storms far worse than this yet now carried a quiet hesitation. And the words were simple, written with clarity and patience, as if the writer had taken their time knowing this moment would come. It read, "If you are reading this, then you chose to stop, and that choice means more than you understand, because kindness is not something the world forgets, even when it seems like it has." And Ethan felt something shift inside him, not sudden but steady, like a door opening in a place he had kept closed for years. And he continued reading, the letter speaking not of wealth or reward, but of a life lived watching, waiting, preparing something not for just anyone, but for someone who would act without expecting anything in return, someone who would still choose to help when the easier path was to keep driving. And as the words unfolded they spoke of the cabin, the hidden room, the box itself, not as a secret to be protected but as a gift, meant to be passed on, a chance to rebuild, to create something meaningful where others had only seen emptiness. And at the bottom of the page there was a final line, written slightly darker as if pressed with more weight. It said, "You were not brought here by accident." And for the first time since stepping into the storm, Ethan believed it completely. And as he lowered the letter his eyes moved back to the box, noticing now what he had missed before. A second layer beneath the envelope, a compartment built into the wood. And when he lifted it carefully, the truth beneath began to reveal itself, not loud, not overwhelming, but undeniable. like a quiet answer to a question he had never known how to ask. The hidden compartment opened with a soft click that echoed more deeply than it should have, as if the sound carried meaning rather than noise. And inside there was no single treasure, but a collection of carefully placed items, each resting in its own space as though arranged with intention rather than storage. A folded map, a small bundle of keys, and a stack of documents bound together with a thin leather strap worn smooth by time. And Ethan reached for them slowly, his movements measured. Not out of fear but respect, because something in the air told him this was not meant to overwhelm. It was meant to reveal itself piece by piece. And when he unfolded the map, the paper crackled softly, its surface marked with hand-drawn lines that traced the surrounding land, the forest, the narrow road he had just traveled, and further beyond, areas he did not recognize at all, marked with small symbols and notes written in the same careful handwriting as the letter, and one location near the edge was circled, darker than the rest, as if it had been returned to again and again, and Ethan felt his breath slow as he studied it, the realization settling in that this was not just a place but a path, something left behind not for discovery alone, but for continuation. And above him Rex shifted again, a low sound traveling down the stairwell, more insistent now, not warning but urging, as if time itself was moving forward and would not wait for hesitation. And Ethan set the map aside, his hand moving to the keys next, each one different, some small and delicate, others heavy and solid, their surfaces etched with faint markings that caught the light when he turned them. And one in particular stood out, larger than the rest, its head engraved with a symbol he recognized without understanding why. A simple shape, clean and precise, yet carrying the weight of something familiar, something tied to a memory just beyond reach. And as his fingers closed around it, a faint warmth spread through his palm, not physical heat, but something quieter, something that lingered. And for a moment he closed his eyes, letting that feeling settle, because it was the same quiet certainty he had felt on the road, the same pull that had guided him here. And when he opened them again, his attention moved to the documents, the leather strap loosening easily as if it had been opened many times before. And inside were papers not of wealth in the traditional sense, but of ownership, deeds, records, tied to land, to structures, to something much larger than the small cabin above. And as he read through them, the truth began to take shape, not loud or overwhelming but steady and undeniable. This was not just a gift left behind. It was a responsibility, a chance to rebuild something that had once mattered, something that had been waiting for the right hands to continue it. And in that quiet chamber beneath the earth, with the storm forgotten and the world above held at a distance, Ethan understood that what he had been given was not simply beyond imagination because of its value, but because of its purpose. And somewhere above, Rex let out a single, steady breath, as if confirming what Ethan had just begun to see, that some paths do not end when you find them, they begin. The realization did not arrive all at once. It settled slowly, like the quiet after a long storm when the world begins to reveal what has changed. And Ethan remained there for a moment, the documents still in his hands, the weight of them no longer just paper, but something far deeper, something tied to decisions he had not yet made. And above him Rex let out a soft, steady bark, not loud but clear, the kind that meant it was time to move. And Ethan gathered the contents carefully, placing everything back into the box with a precision that felt almost instinctive, as if he already understood that this was not something to rush or mishandle. And when he turned toward the stairs, the air seemed different, not heavier but clearer, as though whatever had been waiting below had now been acknowledged. And each step upward felt less like leaving and more like returning, the wooden stairs creaking gently beneath his boots as the warm glow of the cabin above came back into view. And when he reached the top, Rex was already there, standing firm, his eyes fixed not on Ethan but toward the main room, his ears tilted forward in that familiar way that signaled awareness rather than alarm. And Ethan stepped into the cabin once more, the lantern still burning steadily on the table, the shadows no longer stretching but resting. And for a brief moment everything appeared unchanged, the coat still hanging by the door, the photographs still lining the walls, the quiet still wrapped around the space like a blanket. But something was missing, something subtle yet undeniable. and Ethan's gaze moved across the room, until it settled on the empty space near the doorway where the man had stood, and the absence was complete. No sound, no trace, not even the faint impression of footsteps on the floor, as if he had never been there at all. And yet the presence lingered, not in sight but in feeling, like a conversation that had ended but left its meaning behind. And Rex moved slowly toward the center of the room, his nose lowering briefly to the floor before lifting again, his posture calm now, grounded, as if whatever he had sensed earlier had fulfilled its purpose. And Ethan exhaled quietly. The tension he had not realized he carried easing just enough to allow clarity to settle in its place. And he stepped toward the table, resting his hand lightly against its surface, feeling the solid, steady presence beneath his palm. And for the first time since the storm began, he allowed himself to pause, not to question but to understand. Because everything about this night had followed a path too precise to be random. The road, the man, the cabin, the hidden room, all of it connected by something he could not see but could no longer deny. And as he stood there, the lantern flickered once more, not fading but brightening slightly, casting a warm glow across the photographs on the wall, and Ethan's eyes moved to them again, drawn now not by curiosity but by recognition, because something in those images, in the faces captured within them, began to feel familiar in a way that reached beyond memory. And Rex let out a soft breath beside him, settling down at his feet, calm and certain, as if to say that whatever had been set in motion was no longer waiting to be discovered, it was waiting to be continued. The photographs along the wall no longer felt like decoration. They felt like pieces of a story that had been quietly waiting to be understood, and Ethan stepped closer, his eyes moving slowly from one frame to the next, each image capturing moments frozen in time. A man standing beside the very cabin decades younger, a group gathered around a long wooden table outside beneath summer light, and then another, a soldier in uniform. His posture steady, his expression familiar in a way that made Ethan pause, because there was something in the way he stood, something in the quiet strength behind his eyes that mirrored a part of himself he rarely acknowledged. And Rex rose to his feet beside him, his presence calm but attentive, as if he too recognized the importance of what lay in front of them. And Ethan leaned in slightly, studying the details, the insignia on the uniform, the faint markings of a time long past. And then his breath caught, not sharply but deeply, as understanding began to take shape, because the name etched on the key, the handwriting in the letter, the path that had led him here, all of it pointed toward a connection that was no longer distant or abstract. It was personal, woven into something that reached back further than he had ever thought to look. And he stepped back slightly, his gaze shifting across the room again, seeing now what he had missed before, the careful order of everything, the way nothing was out of place, the sense that this cabin had not been abandoned but preserved, held in quiet readiness for a moment that had finally arrived. And Rex moved toward the door, his head tilting as he listened to something outside. And when Ethan followed his gaze, he noticed the storm had softened, the rain now a gentle rhythm against the roof, the wind no longer pressing but passing through, as if whatever force had driven it had completed its purpose. And he opened the door slowly, stepping out onto the small wooden porch, the cool night air brushing against his face with a clarity that felt new. And the forest around him stood still, the trees no longer looming but grounded, their presence steady and calm. And for a moment he simply stood there, the weight of everything settling into place, not as a burden but as a realization, because what he had found inside that hidden room was not the end of something. It was the beginning of something he had not expected, something that asked more of him than he had planned to give. And behind him Rex stepped out onto the porch, sitting down beside him without a sound, his gaze fixed on the darkness ahead, as if watching a path that had yet to be taken. And Ethan looked down at the key, still in his hand, the metal catching the faint light, its surface no longer just an object but a symbol of everything that had been placed in his care. And in that quiet moment, with the storm fading and the night opening before him, he understood that the road he had followed had not ended at this cabin. It had only just begun to reveal where it would lead next. The night no longer felt like an ending. It felt like a threshold, and Ethan stood there on the porch with the key resting in his palm, the metal cool yet steady, as if it carried a quiet promise rather than a question. and the forest stretched out before him in layers of shadow and soft silver light. The rain now reduced to a gentle whisper through the leaves, each drop falling with a rhythm that felt almost deliberate, and Rex shifted beside him, rising slowly to his feet, his ears lifting towards something beyond the trees, not tense, not alarmed, but aware in that deep, instinctive way that had guided them both more times than Ethan could count. And without a word, the dog stepped off the porch, moving forward a few paces before pausing, glancing back just long enough to make sure Ethan would follow. And there was no hesitation now, no second-guessing, because whatever had brought them here was still moving, still unfolding. And Ethan slipped the key into his jacket pocket before stepping down onto the damp earth, the ground soft beneath his boots as he followed Rex into the edge of the forest, the air cool and clean, carrying the scent of pine and wet soil, grounding him in a way that felt both new and familiar. And the path ahead was not visible in any clear sense. No markings, no signs, just the subtle pull of direction that Rex seemed to understand without question, weaving between trees with quiet confidence, his movements smooth and certain as if he had walked this ground before, and Ethan kept pace behind him, his senses sharpening with each step, not out of fear but awareness, the kind that comes when something meaningful is just beyond reach. And after several minutes the trees began to thin slightly, the darkness giving way to a softer openness where the sky above showed through in faint patches of cloud and distant light. And there, just ahead, something took shape, not a structure in the usual sense, but a clearing, wide and still, its edges marked by stones set into the ground in a pattern too deliberate to be natural. And at the center stood a single post, weathered but upright, its surface carved with the same symbol Ethan had seen on the key. And Rex slowed as they approached, his steps careful now, respectful, as if entering a place that held meaning beyond its appearance. And Ethan felt it too, the quiet gravity of the space, not heavy but certain, like standing in a place where something had once begun and was now waiting to begin again. And he reached into his jacket, his fingers closing around the key as he stepped closer to the post, the symbol catching the faint light. And in that moment everything aligned, the storm, the road, the man, the cabin, all of it leading here, not by accident but by design. And as Ethan lifted the key, holding it near the carved mark, he realized that what he had been given was not just something to possess. It was something to unlock, something that required him to step forward not just once, but again and again, choosing the path even when it was not clear. And behind him Rex let out a quiet, steady breath, grounding the moment in something real, something present. And Ethan pressed the key forward, feeling that same faint pulse return, stronger now, as if whatever lay beneath the surface of this place was beginning to respond. And in the stillness of that clearing, with the night watching quietly around them, he understood that the true gift was not what had been left behind, but what he was now being trusted to continue. The moment the key met the carved symbol, the ground beneath Ethan's boots did not shake or break. It simply responded. A quiet shift felt more than heard, like something ancient waking with recognition rather than force. And the carved post gave a low, hollow sound as if it were no longer solid wood, but a marker for something hidden just beneath the surface. And Ethan held the key steady, his breath slow, his focus sharp. Not from fear, but from a deep awareness that this was the point where intention mattered more than action. And then, almost gently, the earth at the base of the post parted, not splitting but sliding, revealing a narrow opening lined with smooth stone that caught the faint light from above. And Rex stepped closer immediately, his body alert but calm, peering into the opening with a quiet certainty that this was not a place to avoid, but a place to enter. And Ethan lowered himself carefully, one hand braced against the edge as his boots found solid ground below, the air cooler here, carrying the same stillness he had felt beneath the cabin, but stronger now, deeper, as if this place was connected to everything he had already seen. And as he stepped fully inside, the opening above sealed just as quietly as it had opened, leaving him surrounded by a soft, ambient glow that seemed to come from the stone itself, not bright but steady, enough to reveal the space without disturbing it. And the passage ahead stretched forward in a straight line, its walls smooth and unmarked. Yet the floor beneath his feet felt worn, not by time alone but by purpose, like it had been walked many times with intention, and Rex moved ahead of him without hesitation, his steps measured, his tail low but steady, guiding rather than reacting, and Ethan followed, each step echoing softly in the enclosed space, the sound fading quickly as if absorbed by the stone. And after several yards the passage opened into a larger chamber, wider than the one beneath the cabin, its ceiling arched and supported by beams that blended seamlessly into the rock. And at the center stood a structure unlike anything he had expected, not a vault, not a container, but a long wooden table surrounded by simple chairs, all positioned as if waiting for people who had not yet arrived. And along the walls were shelves holding tools, maps, and records, each placed with care, not abandoned, but preserved. And Ethan slowed, taking it in, understanding now that this was not a hidden treasure in the way most would imagine. It was something far more deliberate, a place built for use, for continuation, for purpose, and Rex stopped near the table, turning back to Ethan with a quiet look that held no confusion, only confirmation, and Ethan stepped forward, his hand brushing the surface of the table, feeling the solid grain beneath his fingers, the same steadiness he had felt in the cabin, the same presence that carried through everything connected to this place. And in that moment, standing in a room that had been waiting in silence for years, Ethan understood that what he had uncovered was not the end of a story, but the center of it, a place where decisions would matter, where actions would shape what came next, and the quiet around him was no longer empty. It was expectant, as if the space itself was ready to come alive again, not on its own, but through the choices of the one who had been led here. The room did not demand anything from him. It simply existed, steady and patient, as if it had learned long ago that the right person would recognize its purpose without being told. And Ethan stood there for a long moment, his hand resting lightly on the table, feeling the quiet strength in the wood beneath his fingers, the same kind of strength he had once relied on when everything else felt uncertain. And Rex moved slowly around the space, his nose brushing along the edges of the shelves, his steps soft but deliberate, not searching blindly but confirming what was already known. And when he paused beside a stack of records near the far wall, he let out a low, steady sound, drawing Ethan's attention without urgency. And Ethan stepped closer, his eyes following the line of worn folders stacked neatly one beside another, each labeled in the same careful handwriting he had seen before, names, dates, places, all recorded with a precision that spoke of intention rather than routine. And as he reached for one, opening it carefully, he realized these were not just documents. They were stories, records of people who had come before, each one connected by a single thread, moments where someone had chosen to act, to help, to step forward when it would have been easier not to, and in return they had been brought here, not to take something, but to continue something. And Ethan felt that realization settle deeper than anything he had read so far, because it was no longer about him alone. It was part of something larger, something that had existed long before he arrived, and would continue long after. And he closed the folder gently, placing it back where it belonged, understanding now that this place was not built to store wealth. It was built to guide it, to direct it toward purpose rather than possession. And Rex returned to his side, sitting quietly, his gaze steady and calm, as if confirming that the truth had been fully revealed. And Ethan turned his attention back to the center of the room, to the table and the chairs waiting in stillness. And for the first time, he noticed the subtle details he had overlooked, small marks on the wood, faint carvings along the edges, each one different yet connected, like signatures left behind by those who had sat there before him. And he ran his hand lightly over them, feeling the impressions left by others, not as ghosts of the past, but as reminders that he was not alone in this path, that others had stood where he stood now, faced the same quiet moment of choice, and had decided to move forward. And as he stood there, the air in the room seemed to shift slightly, not in temperature or sound, but in presence, as if acknowledging that he understood, that he was no longer just a visitor, but a part of what this place represented. And Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight he carried not lifting but settling into something steadier, something he could hold without being overwhelmed. And in that stillness, with Rex beside him and the quiet history of the room surrounding him, he realized that what he had been given was not meant to be questioned. It was meant to be accepted, not as a burden, but as a chance to do what he had already proven he would do, to choose kindness without knowing what it might bring, and to trust that the path ahead, however unclear, would lead exactly where it needed to go. The understanding did not arrive as a sudden revelation, but as a quiet settling, like the final piece of a puzzle finding its place without force, and Ethan remained standing at the table, his hand resting over the faint carvings, feeling the presence of those who had come before him not as distant memories, but as something woven into the very structure of the room. And for the first time, he did not feel like an outsider stepping into something unknown. He felt aligned with it, as if every step that had brought him here had been shaping him for this moment long before he realized it. And Rex shifted beside him, rising slowly and moving toward the far side of the chamber where a narrow passage extended beyond the shelves, partially hidden in shadow, and he paused there, looking back at Ethan with a steady gaze that carried no urgency, only quiet direction, and Ethan followed without hesitation, his steps measured but certain, because the question of whether to continue had already been answered within him. And as they moved through the passage, the air changed again, becoming lighter, less enclosed, as if they were moving towards something open rather than deeper into the unknown. And after a short distance the passage began to rise, the ground sloping gently upward, until a soft glow appeared ahead, natural this time. Not the steady light of stone, but something warmer, something alive. And when Ethan stepped forward into it, he found himself emerging at the edge of a wide clearing on the other side of the forest, the storm completely gone now, replaced by a sky beginning to soften with the earliest hint of dawn, pale light stretching across the horizon, touching the tops of the trees with a quiet promise of something new. And the clearing itself was not empty. It held the beginnings of something, a structure partially built, beams set into place, tools resting where they had been left as if waiting for hands to return and finish what had been started. And Ethan slowed, taking it in, the connection immediate and unmistakable, because this was what the records had pointed toward, what the map had outlined, not a place to uncover, but a place to continue. And Rex stepped forward onto the open ground, his posture relaxed now, his tail moving slightly as if he recognized this space not as a mystery, but as a destination. And Ethan walked beside him, the damp earth firm beneath his boots, the scent of fresh air replacing the stillness of the chambers below. And as he reached the center of the clearing, he turned slowly, looking back toward the forest from which they had emerged, the path already fading into shadow, not gone but no longer meant to be retraced. And in that moment, he understood something simple and undeniable, that everything he had been given, the cabin, the key, the hidden rooms, the records, none of it was meant to be kept. It was meant to be used, to be carried forward into something that would outlast him, something that would stand as a quiet continuation of the same choice he had made on the road, to stop, to help, to act without expectation. And Rex came to stand beside him, calm and grounded, his presence steady in the growing light. And Ethan exhaled slowly, not out of uncertainty but acceptance, because the path ahead was no longer hidden. It was simply waiting for him to take the next step. The first light of morning did not arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly across the clearing, touching the wooden beams, the scattered tools, and the open ground with a quiet warmth that felt less like a beginning and more like a continuation of something already in motion. And Ethan stood there without moving, letting it settle around him, the cool air softening with each passing moment, the silence no longer empty but full of quiet possibility. And Rex moved ahead a few steps before turning back, his posture relaxed now, his tail giving a slow, steady motion that spoke not of alertness but of peace, as if he understood that whatever had needed to be found had already been placed exactly where it belonged. And Ethan took a breath, deeper than any he had taken since the storm began, and stepped forward into the clearing, his boots pressing into the damp earth with a sense of certainty that had not been there before. Because this was no longer a place he had discovered, it was a place he was now part of. And as he reached the center, he set his hand against one of the upright beams, the wood solid beneath his palm, unfinished but strong, waiting not to be admired but to be completed. And in that simple contact he felt the truth settle fully into place, not as a question, not as a burden, but as a choice he had already made without realizing it. the same choice that had led him to stop on that road, to open that door, to step into the unknown when it would have been easier to walk away. And behind him the forest stood quiet, the path they had taken already blending back into shadow, not erased, but no longer meant to be followed in reverse. And Ethan turned his gaze outward, across the clearing, imagining not what had been here before, but what could be built now, something that would serve others, something that would carry forward the same quiet intention that had guided everything he had uncovered. And Rex came to stand beside him, close enough that Ethan could feel the steady presence at his side, grounding the moment in something real, something present. And for a while they simply stood there, man and dog, in the soft light of a new day, not searching, not questioning, just understanding. And as the sun rose a little higher, casting longer lines of gold across the clearing, Ethan took another step forward, then another, moving toward the tools, toward the work that had been waiting, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper, something that felt right in a way that did not need to be explained. And in that quiet movement the story did not end. It opened, stretching beyond the moment into something ongoing, something lived rather than told. And though there were no words spoken, no voice to guide him now, Ethan knew with a certainty that did not waver that he had been given more than he could have imagined, not because of what he found, but because of what he was now able to give. And as Rex settled nearby, watching the edge of the trees with calm, steady eyes, the world around them continued its slow awakening, the air warming, the light growing. And in that stillness, in that simple beginning, it became clear that sometimes the greatest gift is not something you receive, but the chance to become part of something that keeps going long after you. Take your first step into it.